The small velvet box sat on the mahogany table like a forgotten afterthought, overshadowed by towers of gleaming packages wrapped in designer paper and topped with elaborate bows. Sarah watched her brother Marcus sneer at her modest contribution to their father's 70th birthday celebration, his perfectly manicured fingers drumming against his champagne flute as he surveyed the impressive display of gifts surrounding her simple offering. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Really, Sarah? Marcus drawled, his voice carrying that familiar tone of condescension that had haunted her childhood. A jewelry box from the dollar store for Dad's milestone birthday? He gestured toward his own contribution, a massive flat-screen television still in its pristine packaging, the price tag deliberately left visible to showcase the four-figure amount. I mean, I know money's tight for you, but surely you could have managed something a little more substantial? Sarah's jaw clenched as she absorbed the familiar sting of his words, her fingers unconsciously smoothing the fabric of her simple black dress, a stark contrast to Marcus's expensive tailored suit and designer watch that caught the light with every dismissive gesture. Around them, the rest of the family pretended not to notice the tension, their conversations becoming slightly louder, slightly more forced, as they always did when Marcus decided to showcase his superiority. Their father, Robert, sat in his favorite leather armchair, surrounded by the accumulated wealth of a life spent building his construction empire from nothing. His weathered hands, scarred from decades of manual labor before success found him, rested on the arms of his chair as he watched his children with tired eyes that had seen too much family drama over the years. "Marcus, that's enough," their mother Elena said softly from her position near the fireplace, but her words carried no real authority. She had learned long ago that confronting Marcus directly only made him more vicious, more determined to prove his point. "What? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," Marcus continued, warming to his theme. "Look at this spread. Aunt Patricia got him that beautiful sculpture from Italy. Uncle James flew in that wine collection from France. Even Cousin Lucy managed to get him those premium golf clubs he mentioned wanting." He picked up Sarah's velvet box, turning it over in his hands like it might contaminate him. And Sarah shows up with this trinket? Sarah felt the familiar burn of humiliation creep up her neck, the same feeling that had plagued her throughout their childhood whenever Marcus decided to showcase the differences in their circumstances. She thought of the careful planning that had gone into this moment, the months of preparation that nobody knew about, the sleepless nights spent orchestrating every detail of what was about to unfold. "You know," Marcus continued, apparently not satisfied with the level of discomfort he had already created, "I was telling Jennifer just yesterday about how some people never really grow out of their circumstances, how they carry that poverty mindset with them no matter how many opportunities they're given." He glanced meaningfully at Sarah. Some people just don't understand quality, don't understand what it means to truly honor someone important. Jennifer, Marcus's wife, shifted uncomfortably in her designer dress, her diamond earrings catching the light as she tried to avoid eye contact with Sarah. She had always been kind to Sarah in private, but never had the courage to stand up to her husband's cruelty in public. "That's rich, coming from you," Sarah finally said, her voice steady despite the tremor of anger running through her. "Tell me, Marcus, when was the last time you actually earned something instead of having it handed to you?" Marcus's face darkened, his champagne glass pausing halfway to his lips. "Excuse me? You heard me." Sarah stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. "When was the last time you worked for something, really worked for it, instead of running to Daddy whenever you needed money for your latest business venture that inevitably fails?" The room fell silent, except for the soft crackling of the fire in the fireplace. Even the catering staff in the kitchen seemed to sense the tension, their quiet preparations becoming even more subdued. "I work plenty," Marcus sputtered, his face flushing red. "I run 3 successful businesses." "You mean the restaurants that Dad bailed out twice? Or the real estate venture that would have collapsed if Dad hadn't co-signed those loans?" Sarah's voice remained calm, almost conversational, but there was steel underneath. Or maybe you're talking about the consulting firm that Dad's friends hire out of loyalty, not competence. Marcus slammed his champagne glass down on the side table, the crystal ringing against the wood. At least I'm not living in some cramped apartment, working as a secretary and pretending it's a career. Sarah smiled, and there was something in that smile that made several family members shift uneasily in their seats. You're right, Marcus. Let's talk about careers. Let's talk about what real work looks like. She walked over to where her father sat, the small velvet box still in Marcus's hands. Dad, do you remember when I was 12 and you taught me about compound interest? Robert's eyes softened slightly, a ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You were the only kid I knew who got excited about mathematical formulas. You told me that the secret to building wealth wasn't making a lot of money at once, but making smart decisions consistently over time. Sarah glanced around the room, noting how everyone was listening now, even Marcus, though he was trying to hide it. You said that people who inherited money often lost it because they never learned the discipline that created it in the first place. Marcus scoffed. What's your point, Sarah? That you're secretly some financial genius? Because last I checked, you're driving a 10-year-old Honda and living in a one-bedroom apartment. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right about the car. It's 12 years old, actually. Bought it used with cash because I hate debt payments. She paused, letting that sink in. And you're right about the apartment, too. One bedroom, modest neighborhood, well below my means. See? Marcus turned to the room triumphantly. She admits it. Living below her means because she has to, not because she chooses to. Below my means. Yes, Sarah agreed, but not for the reasons you think. She had spent years preparing for this moment, years watching Marcus's arrogance grow unchecked while she quietly built something he could never understand. The irony wasn't lost on her, that his greatest weakness, his need to publicly humiliate others to feel important, would be the very thing that made this moment so perfectly devastating. You see, Marcus, while you were buying things to impress people you don't like with money you didn't earn, I was learning something Dad tried to teach both of us. The difference between looking wealthy and being wealthy. Marcus was still holding her gift, turning it over in his hands dismissively. Oh, please, spare us the lecture about financial responsibility. We all know you're just bitter because you couldn't hack it in the real world. The real world, Sarah repeated slowly. Is that what you call running to Dad every time one of your ventures fails? Is that what you call borrowing against your trust fund to maintain your lifestyle? The color drained from Marcus's face. That information wasn't supposed to be public knowledge. How did you know about the trust fund loans? Or know about the second mortgage on your house? Or know about the credit card debt you've been hiding from Jennifer? Sarah's voice remained conversational, but there was a predatory stillness about her now that made everyone in the room pay attention. Jennifer's head snapped toward her husband, her face pale. Credit card debt? Marcus, you said we were financially secure. We are, Marcus stammered, but his confidence was cracking.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Sarah's just making things up to deflect from her own failures. Sarah walked over to the fireplace mantel, where several family photos were displayed. She picked up one from Marcus's wedding day, studying it with apparent interest. You know what's funny about success, Marcus? Real success doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to put down others to feel important. It just is. She set the photo down and turned back to face the room. I've been thinking a lot about this family lately, about loyalty, about respect, about what it really means to honor someone. Her eyes found her father's. Dad, you built an empire from nothing. You worked 18-hour days, sacrificed everything, taught us that success comes from discipline and hard work. Robert nodded slowly, his weathered hands clasped together. I tried to teach you both that money is a tool, not a measure of worth. You did, Sarah agreed, but apparently only one of us was listening. Marcus was growing more agitated by the minute. What is this, some kind of intervention? Sarah, just because you're jealous of my success doesn't mean you get to come here and… Your success? Sarah interrupted, and for the first time, her calm facade cracked slightly, revealing the steel underneath. Marcus, you're 42 years old, and you've never earned $1 that didn't come from Dad's wallet or Dad's connections. Your restaurants failed because you treated them like personal piggy banks instead of businesses. Your real estate ventures collapsed because you assumed Dad's reputation would carry you instead of learning the industry. Your consulting firm exists solely because Dad's friends feel obligated to throw you scraps. The silence in the room was deafening. Jennifer was staring at her husband with a mixture of shock and dawning realization. Several relatives had found sudden interest in their drinks or the patterns on the carpet. That's not true, Marcus said weakly, but the fight was going out of him. Isn't it? Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through what appeared to be financial documents. Should we talk about the $150,000 Dad gave you last year to keep the West Side restaurant afloat? Or the $300,000 he co-signed for when you bought that office building that's now worth half what you paid for it? Marcus's face was now completely white. How do you know these numbers? Sarah smiled again, that same unsettling smile that seemed to know secrets. Because unlike you, I actually pay attention to Dad's business. I care about his legacy, his financial well-being, his future. She began walking slowly around the room, her movement deliberate and predatory. You see, while you were busy playing pretend businessman, I was actually building something real. Something that didn't depend on Dad's money or Dad's connections or Dad's reputation. Like what? Marcus shot back, trying to regain some momentum. Your secretarial job? Sarah stopped walking and turned to face him directly. You mean my position as executive assistant to the CEO of Morrison Industries? A few eyebrows raised around the room. Morrison Industries was one of the largest tech companies in the state, a name even Marcus would recognize. Fine, Marcus said dismissively, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. So you have a fancy title for being someone's secretary. That doesn't change the fact that you're still just what, Marcus? Sarah's voice was dangerously quiet. Just someone who worked her way up from nothing? Just someone who earned her position through competence instead of nepotism? Just someone who built real relationships in the business world based on merit instead of family connections? She walked back to the table where her modest gift sat among the expensive offerings. You want to know what I learned in my secretarial job, Marcus? I learned that real power isn't about what you buy, it's about what you build. I learned that respect isn't given because of your last name, it's earned through your actions. And I learned that the most successful people are usually the ones you least expect. Marcus was gripping his champagne glass so tightly his knuckles were white. Get to the point, Sarah. We all know you're building up to something. The point, Sarah said, picking up the velvet box from the table, is that while you were busy mocking my cheap gift, you never bothered to actually look inside. She held the box up to the light, turning it slowly so everyone could see it properly. You're right. This box cost $12 at a craft store. I picked it out specifically because I knew you'd focus on the packaging instead of the contents. Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced and hollow. What could possibly be inside a $12 box that would impress anyone here? Sarah's smile widened, and there was genuine warmth in it now, mixed with something that looked remarkably like triumph. Dad, would you like to do the honors? Robert stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving his daughter's face. There was something in his expression now, a mixture of pride and curiosity and dawning understanding. Sarah, what have you done? Something I should have done years ago, she replied, holding out the box to him. Something that actually honors what you taught me about hard work, discipline, and building something real. The room held its collective breath as Robert took the box from Sarah's hands. His weathered fingers found the small clasp, and he opened it slowly, carefully. Inside, nestled in the cheap velvet lining, was a single folded piece of paper. Not a jewelry piece, not some trinket, but a document that looked official and important. Robert unfolded the paper with the same careful attention he had given to construction blueprints for decades. As his eyes scanned the contents, his expression changed from curiosity to shock to something that might have been awe. Sarah, he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion, this can't be real. What is it? Elena asked, moving closer to her husband. Robert, what's in the box? Marcus was practically vibrating with impatience and anxiety. "Just tell us what it is so we can all move on with our lives." Robert looked up at Sarah, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "It's a check," he said quietly. "A cashier's check made out to me." "How much?" Jennifer asked, though her voice suggested she already suspected this wasn't going to be good news for her husband. Robert's voice was barely audible. $2 million. The silence that followed was so complete that the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner sounded like thunder. Marcus's champagne glass slipped from his nerveless fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor in a spray of crystal and golden liquid. "That's impossible," Marcus breathed. "She can't. There's no way she has that kind of money." Sarah walked over to her father, her movements graceful and unhurried. "Dad, do you remember what you told me about compound interest? About making smart decisions consistently over time?" Robert nodded, still staring at the check in disbelief. "Well," Sarah continued, "I've been making smart decisions for 24 years. Every dollar I earned, every bonus I received, every tax refund I got went into investments. Not flashy investments, not get-rich-quick schemes, just boring, consistent, long-term growth." She gestured around the room, taking in the expensive gifts, the designer clothes, the obvious displays of wealth. While everyone else was spending money to look successful, I was actually building success. While Marcus was buying restaurants he couldn't manage and houses he couldn't afford, I was buying index funds and dividend stocks and letting time do the work. Marcus found his voice, though it came out as a croak. $2 million? You have $2 million? "I had more," Sarah said simply, "but I thought Dad deserved the best birthday gift I could give him, something that actually represents the values he taught me, something that shows I was listening when he talked about building wealth instead of just spending it." The family members began to murmur among themselves, the reality of the situation slowly sinking in. Sarah, the family member they had all dismissed as unsuccessful, as someone who had failed to live up to her potential, had quietly accumulated more wealth than any of them had imagined possible. "But your apartment," Jennifer said weakly, "your car, your clothes. If you have that kind of money, why do you live so modestly?" Sarah shrugged. "Because I learned the difference between being rich and being wealthy. Rich people buy expensive things to show everyone they're rich. Wealthy people buy appreciating assets and let their money work for them. Rich people worry about looking successful. Wealthy people focus on actually being successful." Marcus had sunk into a nearby chair, his face in his hands. "I don't understand. How is this possible? You work as a secretary." "I work as an executive assistant," Sarah corrected gently. "And before that, I worked in accounting. And before that, I worked in data analysis. And before that, I worked in customer service. I learned every aspect of business from the ground up, earned every promotion, built real skills instead of relying on family connections." She walked over to the window, looking out at the landscaped grounds of her family's estate. "You know what the difference is between us, Marcus? You saw Dad's success and thought you deserved to inherit it. I saw Dad's success and wanted to understand it, to build my own version of it." "But $2 million, Elena said. "Sarah, honey, how did you manage to save that much on a secretary's salary?" Sarah turned back to face the room, her expression patient and educational. "It wasn't just about saving, Mom. It was about investing wisely and understanding the power of time and compound growth. My first job out of college paid $32,000 a year. Most people would say that's not enough to build wealth, but I lived on $20,000 and invested the rest." She began counting on her fingers. Indexed funds, dividend-paying stocks, a little real estate investment trust, some international diversification. Nothing fancy, nothing risky, just consistent contributions to a well-diversified portfolio over 24 years. Marcus looked up from his hands, his expression desperate. "But you never had any money. You never went on expensive vacations, never bought designer clothes, never even had a decent car." "Because those things don't build wealth, Marcus. They consume it." Sarah's voice was gentle now, almost pitying. Every dollar you spend on looking wealthy is a dollar that can't grow into $5 or $10 or $50 over time. I chose to look poor so I could actually become wealthy. Robert was still holding the check, turning it over in his hands as if it might disappear if he looked away. Sarah, this is too much. I can't accept this. Yes, you can, Sarah said firmly, and you will. Because this isn't charity, Dad. This is gratitude. This is me showing you that your lessons about hard work and discipline and building something real actually took root. She walked back to her father, placing her hand on his shoulder. You spent your whole life building wealth so your children could have opportunities you never had. Marcus used those opportunities to buy toys and status symbols. I used them to build something that would make you proud. Marcus stood up abruptly, his face red with anger and humiliation. This is all very touching, but let's not pretend this changes anything. So you managed to save some money by living like a pauper. That doesn't make you better than everyone else. Sarah studied her brother for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. You're right, Marcus. Having money doesn't make me better than anyone else. But earning it through discipline and sacrifice and smart decisions, instead of inheriting it or borrowing it or manipulating it out of family members, that does mean something. She gestured toward the pile of expensive gifts on the table. Every gift here represents money spent to impress people, to buy affection, to show off. My gift represents money invested in gratitude, in family, in honoring the man who taught me everything I know about building real success. Marcus was practically shaking with rage now. You think you're so superior with your little nest egg and your modest lifestyle, but you're still just a secretary who lives alone in a crappy apartment. At least I have a family, a life, respect in the community. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. You have a family that you've been lying to about your finances. You have a life built on debt and borrowed money. And you have respect from people who don't know the truth about your circumstances. She pulled out her phone again, scrolling through what appeared to be more financial documents. Should we tell Jennifer about the second mortgage on your house? Or the credit cards you've maxed out to maintain your lifestyle? Or the fact that you owe Dad more money than you've ever earned in your entire life? Jennifer stood up slowly, her face pale. Marcus, is this true? Are we in debt? Marcus opened and closed his mouth several times, but no words came out. Sarah continued relentlessly. According to the financial documents I've reviewed, Marcus owes Dad approximately $800,000 in direct loans, plus another $400,000 in co-signed obligations. His credit cards are maxed out, his mortgage is underwater, and his businesses are hemorrhaging money. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Several family members began whispering among themselves, the revelation spreading through the gathering like wildfire. How do you know all this? Marcus finally managed to ask. Sarah's smile was sad now, almost pitying. Because Dad asked me to help him understand why he keeps having to bail you out. Because I've been quietly managing some of his investment portfolio for the past 5 years. Because unlike you, I actually care about his financial well-being instead of just seeing him as an ATM. Robert stood up, the check still in his hand, his expression grave. Marcus, is this true? Are you really in that much debt? Marcus looked around the room desperately, searching for support, for someone who might take his side. But everyone was staring at him with mixtures of shock, disappointment, and dawning understanding. It's not as bad as she makes it sound, he stammered. The businesses are just going through a rough patch. Once the economy improves. The economy has been improving for years, Sarah said quietly. Your businesses are failing because you don't understand business. You understand spending, you understand borrowing, you understand leveraging Dad's reputation, but you don't understand the fundamentals of creating value, managing cash flow, or building sustainable operations. She walked over to the table and picked up one of Marcus's expensive gift boxes. This television probably cost $3,000. Do you know what $3,000 invested in an S&P 500 index fund 20 years ago would be worth today? Marcus didn't answer, but several people in the room were clearly doing mental calculations. Approximately $15,000, Sarah continued. That's the difference between buying something that loses value the moment you use it and investing in something that grows over time. She set the box down and looked around the room. Every expensive gift here represents the same choice. Money spent on impression instead of investment, on consumption instead of creation, on looking successful instead of building success. Marcus slumped back into his chair, the fight finally going out of him. So, what's your point, Sarah? That you're smarter than everyone else? That we're all financial failures? Sarah's expression softened, and for the first time since the confrontation began, she looked genuinely sad. No, Marcus. My point is that Dad tried to teach us both something important, and only one of us learned the lesson. She walked over to her father, who was still holding the check with shaking hands. Dad, you taught me that real wealth isn't about what you own, it's about what you've built. You taught me that respect isn't given because of your family name, it's earned through your actions. You taught me that success isn't about impressing others, it's about creating value. Robert's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Sarah, I'm so proud of you, but this check, this is too much. No, it's not, Sarah said firmly. It's exactly what you deserve. You spent 30 years building a company from nothing. You sacrificed everything to give your family opportunities. You taught us about hard work and discipline and making smart choices. She glanced around the room, taking in the expensive gifts, the designer clothes, the obvious displays of wealth. Most of your children learned to spend the money you earned. I learned to build on what you taught me. This check represents 24 years of compound growth on the principles you instilled in me. Marcus looked up from his chair, his face a mask of defeat and resentment. So what happens now? You've humiliated me in front of the entire family? You've exposed my financial problems. You've made your point. What do you want? Sarah considered the question for a long moment. I want you to learn the lessons Dad tried to teach us. I want you to stop seeing him as a source of money and start seeing him as a source of wisdom. I want you to build something real instead of just buying things that make you look successful. She walked over to the window again, looking out at the grounds where she had played as a child, where her father had taught her about compound interest while they watched the gardeners work. Most of all, I want you to understand that wealth isn't about what you have, it's about what you've earned. It's not about what you can buy, it's about what you can build. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Finally, he looked up at his sister. How did you do it? Really? How did you accumulate that much money without anyone knowing? Sarah turned back to face the room, her expression patient and educational. It started with living below my means, way below my means. I rented the cheapest apartment I could find that was still safe and clean. I bought used cars with cash. I cooked at home instead of eating out. I bought generic brands instead of name brands. She began pacing slowly, her hands clasped behind her back. But living cheaply was only half the equation. The other half was investing consistently. Every month, without fail, I put money into index funds. When I got raises, I invested the additional income instead of upgrading my lifestyle. When I received bonuses, they went straight into my investment accounts. Jennifer leaned forward, her earlier shock replaced by genuine curiosity. But didn't you ever want to spend money on yourself, to enjoy your earnings? Sarah smiled. I did enjoy them. I enjoyed watching my portfolio grow. I enjoyed the security of knowing I was building wealth instead of just earning money. I enjoyed the freedom that comes from not being trapped by debt or dependent on others for financial support. She gestured toward Marcus, who was still slumped in his chair. Marcus enjoyed his earnings too, but in a different way. He enjoyed the immediate gratification of buying expensive things, of looking successful, of impressing people. The difference is that my enjoyment compounded over time, while his consumption left him with debt and dependency. Robert finally spoke, his voice hoarse with emotion. Sarah, in all my years of business, I've never seen someone so young demonstrate such financial discipline. This check represents more than money. It represents character, wisdom, patience. He stood up slowly, the check still trembling in his hands. "But I can't accept this. It's too much." "Dad," Sarah said gently, "do you remember what you told me about the difference between being rich and being wealthy?" Robert nodded. "Rich people spend money to look important. Wealthy people invest money to become important." "Exactly," Sarah agreed. "This gift isn't me spending money to look generous. It's me investing in what matters most to me: family, gratitude, honoring the man who taught me everything I know about building real success." She walked over to her father and placed her hands over his, helping him hold the check steady. "Besides, this isn't even close to everything I have. This is just what I can afford to give while still maintaining my financial security and growth trajectory." The implications of that statement rippled through the room. If $2 million wasn't even close to everything she had, exactly how much wealth had Sarah quietly accumulated over the years? Marcus looked up sharply. "What do you mean this isn't everything? How much money do you actually have?" Sarah's smile was mysterious now, almost secretive. "Enough to be secure, enough to be generous when it matters, enough to never have to depend on anyone else for my financial well-being." She walked back to the table where her modest velvet box sat among the expensive gifts. You see, the beautiful thing about building wealth instead of just earning money is that it gives you options. Options to be generous without jeopardizing your security. Options to take risks without fear of failure. Options to live life on your own terms instead of being trapped by debt and dependency. Marcus stood up abruptly, his face flushed with renewed anger. "This is all just elaborate showing off. You're no different from anyone else here. You just waited longer to reveal your wealth." Sarah shook her head sadly. "Marcus, if I wanted to show off, I would have bought Dad a $2 million gift instead of giving him a $2 million investment in his future. I would have announced my wealth years ago instead of keeping it private. I would have used money to gain social status instead of using it to honor the man who taught me how to earn it." She gestured around the room again. "Look at this gathering. Everyone here is displaying their wealth through expensive gifts, designer clothes, luxury cars parked outside. That's showing off. What I did was demonstrate the principles Dad taught me by actually living them." Elena, who had been quiet throughout most of the confrontation, finally spoke up. "Sarah, honey, I'm still trying to understand how you managed this. Living modestly is one thing, but accumulating millions of dollars requires more than just saving money." Sarah nodded respectfully toward her mother. "You're absolutely right, Mom. Saving money was just the foundation. Building wealth required education, strategy, and patience." She began counting on her fingers again. "I spent evenings and weekends learning about investing. I read books about compound interest, asset allocation, and long-term growth strategies. I studied successful investors like Warren Buffett and learned about value investing, dollar-cost averaging, and the power of time in the market." Marcus scoffed. "So you read some books about investing? That doesn't make you Warren Buffett." "No," Sarah agreed, "but it made me disciplined. It taught me to ignore market volatility and focus on long-term trends. It taught me to diversify my holdings instead of putting all my money into one investment. It taught me to reinvest dividends and let compound interest do the work." She pulled out her phone and showed them a chart of her portfolio's growth over the years. "This is what 24 years of consistent investing looks like. Not flashy, not dramatic, just steady, reliable growth that compounds over time." The chart showed a clear upward trajectory, with occasional dips during market downturns, but an overall pattern of consistent growth that accelerated in the later years as compound interest began to take effect. Robert studied the chart with the same attention he had once given to construction blueprints. "Sarah, this is remarkable. You've built something substantial, something lasting." "I built it using the principles you taught me, Dad. Hard work, discipline, patience, and smart decision-making." Sarah's voice was filled with genuine warmth and gratitude. "Every dollar in that portfolio represents a choice to delay gratification, to think long-term, to build something real instead of just buying something impressive." Marcus was staring at the chart with a mixture of disbelief and growing understanding. 24 years? He said quietly. You've been doing this for 24 years without anyone knowing. Without anyone asking, Sarah corrected. The difference is important. You assumed I was struggling financially because I lived modestly. You never considered that I might be choosing to live modestly in order to build wealth. She took back her phone and returned it to her pocket. That's the problem with judging success by appearances. Real wealth is often invisible, especially in the early stages when compound interest hasn't had time to work its magic. Jennifer had been quiet for several minutes, processing the implications of what she had learned about her husband's financial situation. Finally, she spoke up. Marcus, is it true? About the debt, the loans from your father, the credit cards? Marcus looked at his wife with desperation in his eyes. Jennifer, it's not as bad as Sarah makes it sound. The businesses are just going through a rough patch. Once things turn around... Marcus, Robert interrupted, his voice tired but firm.
Things have been turning around for 10 years. How many rough patches can a business have before you admit it's not a viable operation? Sarah walked over to her brother, her expression surprisingly gentle. Marcus, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over while expecting different results. You keep starting businesses without understanding business fundamentals. You keep borrowing money without generating sustainable cash flow. You keep living beyond your means while expecting external circumstances to change. She sat down across from him, her posture open and non-threatening. I'm not telling you this to humiliate you. I'm telling you this because I want you to learn what Dad tried to teach us both. Success isn't about looking important, it's about creating value. Wealth isn't about spending money, it's about building assets. Respect isn't given because of your family name, it's earned through your actions. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, his expression was different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine confusion and perhaps the beginning of humility. I don't understand how you did it, he said quietly. I mean, I understand the mechanics of investing, but I don't understand the discipline. How did you resist spending money for 24 years? How did you live so modestly when you could have afforded so much more? Sarah's smile was warm now, almost maternal. Because I understood the difference between pleasure and happiness. Spending money on expensive things provides temporary pleasure, but building financial security provides lasting happiness. She gestured around the room. Every expensive gift here will be forgotten within a few months. Every designer outfit will go out of style. Every luxury car will depreciate in value. But the security that comes from financial independence, the freedom that comes from not being dependent on others, the satisfaction that comes from building something real, those things last. Marcus nodded slowly, as if seeing his sister clearly for the first time. But didn't you ever feel like you were missing out? Like you were wasting your youth by not enjoying your money? I was enjoying my money, Sarah replied. I was enjoying watching it grow, enjoying the security it provided, enjoying the options it created for my future. I was also enjoying the knowledge that I was building something that would allow me to be generous when it mattered, like today. She stood up and walked back to her father, who was still holding the check with reverent care. Dad, this gift isn't about the money. It's about showing you that your lessons took root, that your example inspired me to build something real, that your daughter learned the difference between earning respect and demanding it. Robert's eyes were bright with tears now. Sarah, I am so proud of you, not because of the money, but because of the character it represents. The discipline, the patience, the wisdom to delay gratification for long. Robert wiped his eyes with the back of his weathered hand, the check trembling slightly as he held it against his chest. The weight of his daughter's sacrifice seemed to press down on him, making him appear older than his 70 years. He looked around the room at the faces of his family members, seeing them perhaps more clearly than he had in years. 24 years, he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah, you've been building this in silence for 24 years. Sarah nodded, moving to sit beside her father on the arm of his leather chair. I learned from watching you, Dad. You didn't announce your success when you were building the company. You just worked, saved, invested, and let your actions speak for themselves. Marcus had grown increasingly quiet as the reality of his situation settled over him like a heavy blanket. The contrast between his public image and his actual financial position was becoming impossible to ignore, especially with his wife's shocked stare boring into him from across the room. Jennifer, Marcus began hesitantly, I can explain about the debt. It's really not as serious as Sarah is making it seem. Jennifer's voice was barely above a whisper when she responded, $800,000 in loans from your father, Marcus. $400,000 in co-signed obligations? How is that not serious? Sarah pulled a folder from her purse, one that had been hidden beneath her modest black shawl throughout the evening. Actually, Jennifer, those figures are from 6 months ago. The current numbers are somewhat higher. She opened the folder and removed a detailed financial analysis, printed on professional letterhead. Marcus, since Dad asked me to help him understand your financial situation, I've been conducting a comprehensive review of all the loans, investments, and business ventures he's supported over the years. Marcus's face drained of color as he recognized the thoroughness of the document Sarah was holding. You had no right to investigate my finances. I had Dad's permission to investigate his finances, Sarah corrected calmly. The fact that your finances are so entangled with his made this analysis necessary for his financial planning. She turned to a specific page in the report. According to my calculations, the total amount Dad has invested in your various ventures over the past 15 years exceeds $1.2 million. That includes direct loans, co-signed mortgages, business partnerships, and cash infusions to prevent bankruptcies. The room fell silent, except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock and the crackling of the fire. Even the catering staff had stopped moving in the kitchen, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Robert's voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. $1.2 million? Sarah nodded gravely. And that doesn't include the opportunity cost of that money. If those funds had been invested in index funds instead of Marcus's businesses, they would be worth approximately $3.8 million today. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is ridiculous. You're making me sound like some kind of criminal. I'm an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship involves risk. Risk implies the possibility of both profit and loss, Sarah replied evenly. Your ventures have generated consistent losses for 15 years. At what point does entrepreneurship become gambling with other people's money? Jennifer was scrolling through her phone, her face growing paler by the minute. Marcus, I'm looking at our credit card statements. These charges, when did you spend $4,000 at that electronics store? And why are there monthly payments to something called premium auto leasing? Marcus began pacing, his movements erratic and desperate. Those are business expenses, Jennifer. The electronics are for the new consulting firm's office setup. The car lease is necessary for client meetings. Sarah consulted her folder again. The electronics were gaming equipment delivered to your home address. The car lease is for a BMW that you've been driving personally for 8 months while telling Dad it was a company vehicle. The accusations were piling up like evidence in a courtroom, each revelation more damaging than the last. Marcus's carefully constructed facade was crumbling in real time, and everyone in the room could see it happening. Furthermore, Sarah continued, the consulting firm that supposedly required these business expenses has generated exactly 0 revenue in the 8 months since its incorporation. 0 clients, 0 contracts, 0 income of any kind.
Uncle James, who had been quietly nursing his scotch in the corner, finally spoke up. Marcus, son, is this true? Have you really been borrowing money from your father for 15 years without generating any sustainable income? Marcus whirled around to face his uncle, his expression wild. You don't understand the complexities of modern business, Uncle James. Success takes time. It requires investment, patience, strategic positioning. It requires customers, Sarah said simply. It requires products or services that people actually want to buy. It requires understanding basic business principles like cash flow, profit margins, and sustainable growth. She pulled out another document from her folder. I've analyzed each of Marcus's business ventures from a basic financial perspective. The restaurants failed because he treated them as personal dining rooms instead of businesses, giving away meals to friends and family while ignoring food costs and labor management.
The real estate investments failed because he bought properties at the peak of market cycles without understanding valuation fundamentals or rental income potential. Marcus was becoming increasingly agitated, his face flushed with embarrassment and rage. You think you're so smart with your little spreadsheets and your investment theories, but you don't know what it's like to actually run a business, to deal with employees and customers and real-world problems. You're right, Sarah agreed. I've never run a business. I've just worked for successful businesses and learned how they actually operate. I've observed what separates profitable companies from failing ones. I've studied what makes some entrepreneurs successful while others consistently lose money. She walked over to the mantelpiece, where a photograph of their father's first construction office sat among other family memorabilia. Dad, when you started your company, what was the first thing you focused on? Robert's voice was steady, despite the emotional weight of the evening. Finding customers who needed what I could provide and delivering quality work at a fair price. Exactly, Sarah said, turning back to face Marcus. You focused on creating value for other people. Every successful business starts with the same principle. Identify what people need and figure out how to provide it better, faster, or cheaper than the competition. Marcus slumped back into his chair, the fight temporarily drained out of him. It's not that simple anymore. The market is different now. There's more competition, more regulations, more complexity. Sarah's expression softened slightly, showing the first hint of sympathy she'd displayed toward her brother all evening. Marcus, you're not wrong that business is more complex now, but the fundamentals haven't changed. Successful businesses create value for customers, manage their expenses carefully, and generate more revenue than they spend. She sat down across from him, her posture less confrontational. Your businesses fail because you start with the wrong question. Instead of asking, what do customers need that I can provide, you ask, what business would make me look successful? Instead of focusing on serving others, you focus on impressing others. Jennifer had been quiet during this exchange, but now she looked up from her phone with tears in her eyes. Marcus, I found more charges. $2,300 at that expensive steakhouse downtown last month. $1,500 at the wine store. $800 for what looks like a spa day. Marcus opened his mouth to explain, but Jennifer continued. These aren't business expenses, are they? You've been using credit cards to maintain our lifestyle while telling me we were financially secure. The silence stretched on until Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely audible. I didn't want you to worry. I thought the consulting firm would take off, that I could pay everything back once the contracts started coming in. Contracts from where? Sarah asked gently. You've incorporated a consulting firm, but what specific expertise are you planning to sell? What problem are you uniquely qualified to solve for potential clients? Marcus stared at his hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. I thought, with Dad's connections in construction, maybe some of his business associates would need advice on expansion or project management or... Dad's associates who have been successfully running construction companies for decades would need business advice from someone with no successful business experience? Sarah's tone wasn't mocking, but the logical flaw in Marcus's plan was obvious to everyone in the room. Robert shifted in his chair, the check still in his hands. Son, why didn't you ever ask me for advice instead of just asking for money? I could have taught you what I learned about building a business, about managing cash flow, about understanding your customers. Marcus looked up at his father with something that might have been pain in his eyes. Because you always made it look so easy. You built this empire, provided for our family, earned everyone's respect. I thought I should be able to figure it out on my own. Making it look easy and it actually being easy are two very different things, Robert replied. I failed at more ventures than I succeeded at before I learned what worked. The difference is that I failed with my own money, not someone else's, and I learned from each failure instead of just moving on to the next idea. Sarah leaned forward, her expression earnest. Marcus, that's what I've been trying to tell you. Building wealth, whether through investments or business ownership, requires understanding certain fundamentals. You can't skip the learning phase and jump straight to success. She pulled out her phone and showed him an app that tracked her investment portfolio. This account represents 16 years of contributions to index funds. Look at the growth pattern. The chart showed steady, consistent growth, with occasional dips during market downturns, but an overall trajectory that climbed steadily upward over time. Now, look at this, Sarah continued. This is a simulation of what would have happened if I had tried to time the market, buying and selling based on news headlines or market predictions. The second chart showed much more volatile performance, with periods of dramatic gains followed by equally dramatic losses, resulting in significantly lower overall returns. The difference between these two approaches is the same difference between your business ventures and Dad's construction company. Dad built slowly, consistently, focusing on fundamentals and long-term growth. You've been chasing quick wins and flashy opportunities without building a solid foundation. Marcus studied the charts with growing comprehension. So you're saying I should have started smaller, focused on one thing instead of jumping between different businesses? I'm saying you should have started by learning what you didn't know, Sarah replied. Before investing Dad's money in restaurants, you should have worked in restaurants and learned how they actually operate. Before buying real estate, you should have studied market cycles and rental income analysis. She gestured toward their father. Dad didn't wake up one day and decide to start a construction company. He worked construction for years, learned every aspect of the business, understood the industry inside and out before he risked his own money on starting a company. Jennifer was scrolling through more financial documents on her phone, her expression growing increasingly distressed. Marcus, there are more charges here that I don't understand. What is executive business coaching for $2,500 a month? Marcus opened his mouth to explain, but Jennifer continued. These aren't business expenses, are they? You've been using credit cards to maintain our lifestyle while telling me we were financially secure. The silence stretched on until Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely audible. I didn't want you to worry. I thought the consulting firm would take off, that I could pay everything back once the contracts started coming in. Contracts from where? Sarah asked gently. You've incorporated a consulting firm, but what specific expertise are you planning to sell? What problem are you uniquely qualified to solve for potential clients? Marcus stared at his hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. With Dad's connections in construction, maybe some of his business associates would need advice on expansion or project management or... Dad's associates who have been successfully running construction companies for decades would need business advice from someone with no successful business experience? Sarah's tone wasn't mocking, but the logical flaw in Marcus's plan was obvious to everyone in the room. Robert shifted in his chair, the check still in his hands. Son, why didn't you ever ask me for advice instead of just asking for money? I could have taught you what I learned about building a business, about managing cash flow, about understanding your customers. Marcus looked up at his father with something that might have been pain in his eyes. Because you always made it look so easy. You built this empire, provided for our family, earned everyone's respect. I thought I should be able to figure it out on my own. Making it look easy and it actually being easy are two very different things, Robert replied. I failed at more ventures than I succeeded at before I learned what worked. The difference is that I failed with my own money, not someone else's, and I learned from each failure instead of just moving on to the next idea. Sarah leaned forward, her expression earnest. Marcus, that's what I've been trying to tell you. Building wealth, whether through investments or business ownership, requires understanding certain fundamentals. You can't skip the learning phase and jump straight to success. She pulled out her phone and showed him an app that tracked her investment portfolio. This account represents 16 years of contributions to index funds. Look at the growth pattern. The chart showed steady, consistent growth with occasional dips during market downturns, but an overall trajectory that climbed steadily upward over time. Now look at this, Sarah continued, switching to another screen. This is a simulation of what would have happened if I had tried to time the market, buying and selling based on...
Marcus's face reddened. It's professional development. Learning advanced business strategies from successful entrepreneurs. Sarah pulled another document from her folder. Executive business coaching is a lifestyle guru who sells courses on manifesting wealth through positive thinking. I found reviews online describing it as essentially a very expensive self-help program with no practical business training. The revelation hit the room like another shockwave. Even the family members who had been trying to remain neutral were beginning to exchange meaningful glances. $2,500 a month for self-help courses? Jennifer repeated, her voice hollow. While you were telling me we needed to cut back on groceries to manage our budget. Marcus stood up again, his movements agitated. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. Everyone expects me to be successful like Dad. Everyone assumes that because I'm Robert's son, I should automatically know how to build wealth and run businesses. So, instead of learning those skills, you decided to fake having them? Sarah asked, not unkindly. Instead of building competence, you focused on building the appearance of competence? She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the well-maintained grounds of their family estate. Marcus, there's no shame in not knowing something. The shame comes from pretending you know something when you don't, especially when that pretense costs other people money. Robert set the check down on the side table and rubbed his temples. Marcus, in 30 years of running Vi Company, the most expensive mistakes I made were when I let ego override judgment. When I thought I knew something I didn't, when I was too proud to ask for advice, when I prioritized looking competent over actually being competent. But I did ask for advice, Marcus protested. I asked you for money to invest in opportunities that seemed promising. You asked for money, Robert corrected. You never asked for advice. You never wanted to discuss the business fundamentals of your ventures. You never asked me to review your business plans, or help you understand market dynamics, or teach you about cash flow management. Sarah turned back to face the room. Dad, can you explain the difference between investing in someone and enabling someone? Robert considered the question carefully before responding. When you invest in someone, you're providing resources to help them build capabilities and create value. When you enable someone, you're providing resources that allow them to avoid developing capabilities while maintaining destructive patterns. The distinction hung in the air like an indictment. Marcus sank back into his chair, the weight of his father's words clearly hitting their mark. 15 years, Marcus said quietly. I've been taking money from you for 15 years without learning anything or building anything sustainable. The money isn't the real problem, Robert replied. Money can be earned back. The problem is that you've spent 15 years avoiding the difficult work of developing real skills and understanding real principles. Sarah walked back to her seat, her expression thoughtful. Marcus, can I ask you something? What do you think success looks like? Marcus looked up, confusion evident on his face. What do you mean? I mean, when you picture a successful person, what do you see? How do you define success? Marcus was quiet for a moment, apparently considering the question seriously for the first time. Someone who has money, I guess, who can afford nice things, who gets respect from others, who doesn't have to worry about finances. Sarah nodded. That's how most people define success. But that's actually a description of the results of success, not success itself. You've been chasing the results without understanding the process that creates those results. She pulled out her phone again and showed him a different app. This tracks my net worth over time, but it also tracks the behaviors that built that net worth. Hours spent learning about investments, books read about financial planning, courses taken on business fundamentals, mistakes analyzed, and lessons learned. The app showed a detailed log of educational activities, investment decisions, and their outcomes over nearly 2.5 decades. Real success isn't about having money, Marcus. It's about developing the capabilities that create money. It's not about looking wealthy, it's about building wealth. It's not about impressing others, it's about creating value for others. Marcus stared at the phone screen, apparently trying to process the implications of what his sister was showing him. You tracked all of this for 24 years? I tracked it because I wanted to understand what worked and what didn't, Sarah replied.
Every investment decision, every financial mistake, every lesson learned was documented so I could improve my approach over time. She scrolled through the app, showing entries that went back decades. Look at this entry from 2003. I invested in a technology stock because I thought I understood the company's potential. I lost 40% of that investment when the company failed 6 months later. Marcus leaned forward, interested despite himself. What did you learn from that? That I didn't understand the technology industry well enough to pick individual winners and losers, Sarah replied. So I stopped trying to pick individual stocks and focused on diversified index funds that didn't require me to be smarter than professional analysts. She showed him another entry. Here's one from 2008, during the financial crisis. My portfolio lost 30% of its value in 6 months. I was tempted to sell everything and wait for the market to recover. Did you sell? Jennifer asked, apparently drawn into the story despite her distress about Marcus's financial situation. No, Sarah replied. I kept contributing to my investments throughout the crisis, buying more shares when prices were low. By 2010, my portfolio had not only recovered but reached new highs because I had been able to buy more shares at discounted prices. Marcus was studying the app with growing fascination. You made money during the worst financial crisis in decades? I made money because I understood that market crashes are temporary, but market growth is permanent over long time periods, Sarah explained. I had studied historical market data and knew that every previous crash had been followed by recovery and new growth. She switched to a different screen, showing long-term market performance. This chart shows the S&P 500's performance over the past century. Every crash, every recession, every crisis was followed by recovery and new growth, but only if you had the discipline to stay invested instead of panicking and selling at the bottom. Robert had been listening to this exchange with growing interest. Sarah, you're describing the same principle that applies to business. Short-term setbacks are inevitable, but long-term success comes to those who understand fundamentals and stick to sound principles. Exactly, Sarah agreed. The difference is that Marcus has been treating business like gambling, hoping for quick wins and abandoning strategies when they don't produce immediate results. Real business success, like investment success, comes from understanding principles and applying them consistently over time.
Marcus was quiet for several minutes, apparently processing this new perspective on success and wealth building. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost much of its earlier defensiveness. So, when you were living in that small apartment and driving that old car, you weren't struggling financially? You were choosing to live that way in order to invest more money. I was choosing to delay gratification in order to build long-term security, Sarah confirmed. Every dollar I didn't spend on impressing others was a dollar that could compound and grow over time. She pulled up another screen on her phone. Look at this calculation. If I had bought a new car every 5 years instead of driving used cars, I would have spent approximately $200,000 more on transportation over the past 24 years. Marcus leaned forward to see the numbers. $200,000 just on cars? But that's not the real cost, Sarah continued. The real cost is what that money could have earned if invested instead. $200,000 invested in index funds over 24 years would be worth approximately $1.2 million today. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the magnitude of that number. The difference between looking successful and building wealth was literally measured in millions of dollars over a lifetime. Jennifer was staring at her husband with a mixture of sadness and dawning understanding. Marcus, we've been spending money we don't have to look like people we're not, while your sister was building actual wealth by living below her means. Marcus nodded slowly, the reality of his situation finally settling in completely. I've been doing everything backwards, haven't I? You've been focusing on the wrong metrics, Sarah replied gently. Instead of measuring success by what you could buy, you should have been measuring success by what you were building. Instead of trying to look wealthy, you should have been trying to become wealthy. She walked over to the table where the expensive gifts were still displayed. Every gift here represents money spent on temporary impression. Your television will be obsolete in 5 years.
Aunt Patricia's sculpture will gather dust on a shelf. Uncle James's wine will be consumed and forgotten. She gestured toward the simple velvet box that had contained her check. But this gift represents something permanent: investment in Dad's future security, gratitude for his sacrifices, and demonstration that his lessons about building wealth were not wasted. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the grounds where he had played as a child, where his father had tried to teach him about hard work and discipline and building something lasting. "I don't know how to fix this," he said quietly. 15 years of bad decisions, all this debt, businesses that don't work. I don't know where to start. Sarah joined him at the window, her expression compassionate for the first time all evening. You start by accepting reality instead of fighting it. You start by learning instead of pretending you already know. You start by building real skills instead of buying the appearance of success. She put her hand on his shoulder. "Marcus, you're 42 years old. That seems old when you're focused on quick fixes and immediate results. But if you're thinking about building wealth over the next 20 or 30 years, 42 is actually still young enough to accumulate significant assets." Marcus turned to look at his sister. "But I don't have your discipline. I don't have your patience. I've never been able to delay gratification like you have." "Discipline isn't a personality trait, Marcus. It's a skill that can be learned," Sarah replied. "I wasn't born with the ability to delay gratification. I developed that ability by understanding the long-term consequences of my choices." She pulled out her phone again and showed him a different app. "This is a compound interest calculator. Let me show you what consistent saving and investing could look like for someone your age." She entered some numbers into the app. If you could save and invest $500 per month starting now with average market returns, you would have approximately $600,000 by the time you're 67. Marcus stared at the projection. $500 a month? I can barely manage our current expenses. "Because you're spending money on things that don't build wealth," Sarah replied. "The BMW lease, the expensive dinners, the lifestyle coaching, the electronics, all of that money could be redirected toward building actual security instead of maintaining the appearance of success." Jennifer had joined them at the window. "Marcus, maybe Sarah is right. Maybe we need to completely rethink how we approach money and success." Marcus looked at his wife, then at his sister, then back at the compound interest projection on the phone. "It seems impossible. 25 years of disciplined saving and investing. I've never stuck to anything for 25 years. "You don't have to commit to 25 years right now," Sarah said gently. "You just have to commit to understanding what you're trying to accomplish and why it matters. Once you understand the principles, the discipline becomes easier because you can see how each choice either supports or undermines your long-term goals." She walked back to her father, who had been listening to the conversation with growing hope in his eyes. "Dad, remember when you taught me about compound interest when I was 12? You didn't just show me the math. You helped me understand what it meant, why it mattered, how it could change my life." Robert smiled for the first time all evening. "You asked me to calculate how much money you would have if you saved your allowance for 10 years instead of spending it on candy and toys. And when you showed me that my $50 monthly allowance could become $30,000 with compound interest, I stopped seeing that money as spending money and started seeing it as investment money," Sarah continued. She turned back to Marcus. "That's what you need to develop, a different relationship with money. Instead of seeing it as something to spend on immediate gratification, you need to see it as something to invest in future security and freedom." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he had learned. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, less defensive, and more genuinely curious. "Sarah, if I wanted to start over, to really learn how to build wealth instead of just pretending to have it, where would I begin?" Sarah smiled, and it was the first completely genuine smile she had shown all evening. "You would begin by getting honest about your current situation. All the debt, all the failed businesses, all the money you owe Dad. No more pretending, no more excuses, no more wishful thinking about magical turnarounds." Marcus nodded slowly, and then, Then you would create a plan to address the debt systematically while simultaneously building new sources of income based on real skills and real value creation, Sarah replied. Not another business venture built on borrowed money and wishful thinking, but actual work that provides value to others and generates sustainable income. Jennifer had joined them at the window. Marcus, maybe Sarah is right. Maybe we need to completely rethink how we approach money and success. Marcus looked at his wife, then at his sister, then back at the compound interest projection on the phone. It seems impossible. 25 years of disciplined saving and investing. I've never stuck to anything for 25 years. You don't have to commit to 25 years right now, Sarah said gently. You just have to commit to understanding what you're trying to accomplish and why it matters. Once you understand the principles, the discipline becomes easier because you can see how each choice either supports or undermines your long-term goals. She walked back to her father, who had been listening to the conversation with growing hope in his eyes. Dad, remember when you taught me about compound interest when I was 12? You didn't just show me the math. You helped me understand what it meant, why it mattered, how it could change my life. Robert smiled for the first time all evening. You asked me to calculate how much money you would have if you saved your allowance for 10 years instead of spending it on candy and toys. And when you showed me that my $50 monthly allowance could become $30,000 with compound interest, I stopped seeing that money as spending money and started seeing it as investment money, Sarah continued. That's what you need to develop, a different relationship with money. Instead of seeing it as something to spend on immediate gratification, you need to see it as something to invest in future security and freedom. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he had learned. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, less defensive, and more genuinely curious. Sarah, if I wanted to start over, to really learn how to build wealth instead of just pretending to have it, where would I begin? Sarah smiled, and it was the first completely genuine smile she had shown all evening. You would begin by getting honest about your current situation. All the debt, all the failed businesses, all the money you owe Dad. No more pretending, no more excuses, no more wishful thinking about magical turnarounds. Marcus nodded slowly, and then? Then you would create a plan to address the debt systematically while simultaneously building new sources of income based on real skills and real value creation. Not another business venture built on borrowed money and wishful thinking, but actual work that provides value to others and generates sustainable income. Jennifer looked hopeful for the first time all evening. Maybe Sarah is right. Maybe we need to completely rethink how we approach money and success. Marcus looked at his wife, then at his sister, then back at the compound interest projection on the phone. It seems impossible. 25 years of disciplined saving and investing. I've never stuck to anything for 25 years. You don't have to commit to 25 years right now, Sarah said gently. You just have to commit to understanding what you're trying to accomplish and why it matters. Once you understand the principles, the discipline becomes easier because you can.
But what kind of job could I get? I don't have any real experience in anything except starting businesses that fail. You have 15 years of experience learning what doesn't work, Sarah replied. That's actually valuable knowledge if you're willing to be honest about it. You understand the mistakes that lead to business failure. That experience could be valuable to established companies that want to avoid those mistakes. She pulled out her phone and showed him a job search website. There are positions in business consulting, project management, and operational analysis that would allow you to use your experience with failed ventures to help successful companies identify and avoid potential problems. Marcus studied the listings with growing interest. These jobs pay actual salaries, not just commissions or profit sharing based on bringing in clients? Real jobs with real paychecks, Sarah confirmed. $40,000 to $60,000 a year to start, with potential for growth based on performance rather than family connections. Robert had been listening to this exchange with visible relief. Son, I think Sarah is right. You need to learn what it means to earn money through your own efforts before you try to build a business again. Marcus nodded slowly. And what about all the debt? The loans from you, the credit cards, the mortgage?
Sarah consulted her folder again. I've prepared a debt consolidation and repayment plan based on realistic income projections. It would take approximately 7 years to pay off everything if you commit to living within your means and directing all extra income toward debt reduction. 7 years, Marcus repeated. That seems like forever. 7 years is nothing compared to 15 years of accumulating debt while learning nothing, Sarah replied. And at the end of those 7 years, you would be debt-free and ready to start building wealth using the principles Dad tried to teach us. Jennifer was looking at the debt repayment plan with cautious optimism. Sarah, does this plan account for our current living expenses? It assumes you would downsize significantly, Sarah replied honestly. Sell the house, move to a modest apartment, get rid of the BMW lease, eliminate all unnecessary expenses. Live like students again until you've paid off the debt and learned how to manage money properly. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, apparently trying to imagine such a dramatic lifestyle change. When he finally spoke, his voice was subdued but determined. I've been living a lie for 15 years, he said quietly, pretending to be successful while actually destroying my family's financial security. Maybe it's time to live honestly, even if that means admitting I don't know what I'm doing. Sarah walked over to her brother and put her hand on his arm. Marcus, admitting you don't know something is the first step toward learning it. There's no shame in being ignorant about something you were never properly taught. The shame only comes from staying ignorant when you have the opportunity to learn. Robert stood up slowly, the check still in his hand. Sarah, this gift you've given me, it's not just money. It's proof that everything I tried to teach you about building something real actually worked. He walked over to Marcus and put his other hand on his son's shoulder. And son, this conversation we've had tonight, it's the first real hope I've had in 15 years that you might actually learn these lessons too. Marcus looked at his father with tears in his eyes. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all the money I wasted, all the opportunities I squandered, all the disappointment I've caused. Apologies don't matter as much as actions, Robert replied gently. But if you're serious about changing direction, about learning what I tried to teach you, then this conversation was worth more than all the money you lost. Sarah pulled out a business card from her purse. Marcus, this is the contact information for a financial counselor who specializes in debt consolidation and budgeting. She helped several colleagues of mine get their finances back on track. Marcus took the card, studying it carefully. And she works with people who have made the kind of mistakes I've made? She works with people who are ready to stop making excuses and start making changes, Sarah replied. The question is whether you're ready to do the work required to build a different kind of life. Marcus looked around the room, taking in the expensive gifts, the designer clothes, the obvious displays of wealth that had seemed so important just hours earlier. I think I'm finally ready to learn the difference between looking successful and being successful. Sarah smiled and hugged her brother for the first time in years. Then this has been the most successful birthday party Dad could have asked for. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the lobby of Morrison Industries, watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows as a familiar figure approached the building's entrance. Marcus walked differently now, his gait purposeful rather than the swagger she remembered from their father's birthday party. Gone was the expensive suit, replaced by a modest button-down shirt and slacks that suggested practicality over impression. He had called her the previous evening, his voice carrying a mixture of nervousness and determination that she had never heard from him before. The debt counselor had helped him create a realistic budget, and he had taken a position as a project coordinator with a mid-sized consulting firm. Nothing glamorous, but steady work that required him to actually solve problems rather than simply spend other people's money on solutions that never materialized. Sarah met him at the security desk, noting the genuine gratitude in his expression when he saw her. The arrogance that had defined their interactions for decades had been replaced by something approaching humility, though she suspected it would take years for him to fully shed the entitled mindset that had driven his previous decisions. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Marcus said. I know I have no right to ask for your help after everything that happened. Sarah pressed a button for the executive floor, studying her brother's reflection in the polished steel doors. You're not asking for money, are you, Marcus? Because if this is another business proposition disguised as a family reconciliation... No, Marcus said quickly, shaking his head. Nothing like that. I actually wanted to show you something. Something I've been working on since we last talked. The elevator doors opened onto the familiar marble and glass lobby of the executive floor. Sarah's assistant, Michelle, looked up from her desk with polite curiosity as they approached. Michelle, this is my brother Marcus. Would you mind if we used the small conference room for about 30 minutes? Michelle nodded and handed Sarah a key card. Of course. Your 2 o'clock appointment has been moved to 2:30, so you have plenty of time. The conference room was simple but elegant, with a polished wood table and ergonomic chairs that spoke to the company's success without being ostentatious. Marcus set a worn leather portfolio on the table, his hand slightly shaking as he opened it. I've been seeing the financial counselor you recommended, he began, pulling out a thick folder of documents. Dr. Martinez has been helping me understand not just how to manage debt, but how to think differently about money and success. Sarah sat down across from him, her expression neutral but attentive. 3 months wasn't long enough to completely transform a person's relationship with money, but it might be long enough to begin the process if Marcus was genuinely committed to change. She had me do an exercise, Marcus continued, spreading several handwritten pages across the table. I had to document every financial decision I've made over the past 5 years and analyze what motivated each choice.
Sarah leaned forward to examine the documents, surprised by their thoroughness. Each page contained detailed entries describing specific purchases, investments, or business decisions, along with Marcus's analysis of the underlying motivations and outcomes. This restaurant investment, Marcus said, pointing to an entry from 2 years earlier, I told myself I was investing in a growing business opportunity, but when I really examined my motivations, I realized I was trying to impress Jennifer's friends who always talked about knowing restaurant owners. He flipped to another page, the BMW lease. I convinced myself it was necessary for client meetings, but the truth is, I wanted to look successful when I pulled up to Dad's construction sites. I wanted his workers and subcontractors to see me as someone important. Sarah studied the entries with growing interest. The level of self-reflection was deeper than she had expected, suggesting that Marcus might actually be capable of the kind of honest self-assessment required for genuine change. Dr. Martinez said that most people who struggle with money have the same problem I had, Marcus continued. They're trying to purchase feelings or status or validation instead of trying to build security or capability. He pointed to a particularly detailed entry about his failed consulting firm. I spent $8,000 on office furniture and technology before I had a single client because I thought having an impressive office would make me feel like a real businessman. But real businessmen generate revenue first and worry about appearances later. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. What did you learn from this analysis? Marcus was quiet for a moment, apparently choosing his words carefully. I learned that I've been using money to try to become someone I'm not, instead of using it to become the best version of who I actually am. He pulled out another document, this one typed and formatted like a business plan. So I've been working on something different, not another business venture, but a plan for how to rebuild my life based on creating value instead of consuming it. Sarah accepted the document and began reading through it. The plan was remarkably detailed and realistic, focusing on debt elimination, skill development, and gradual wealth building through consistent saving and investing. What impressed her most was that it didn't promise quick results or dramatic transformations, but rather steady progress over many years. You're planning to stay in your current job for at least 3 years, Sarah observed, reading from the timeline section. That's very different from your usual approach of jumping between opportunities. Marcus nodded. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that I've never learned what it actually takes to be good at something because I've never stuck with anything long enough to develop real competence. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. Sarah, I've been working as a project coordinator for 3 months, and I'm already learning things about business operations that I never understood when I was trying to run my own companies. Such as? Such as the difference between activity and productivity, Marcus replied. I used to think that being busy meant I was being successful, but now I see that most of my activity was just spinning my wheels without creating any real value. He pulled out a notebook and showed her pages of observations about his current workplace.
I've been studying how successful projects actually get completed. It's not about having brilliant ideas or impressive presentations. It's about understanding requirements, managing resources, communicating clearly, and following through on commitments. Sarah read through several pages of his notes, impressed by their practical focus. Marcus was documenting specific processes, analyzing what made some projects successful while others failed, and identifying the skills and knowledge he needed to develop further. "This is good work, Marcus," she said, and meant it. "You're developing the kind of operational understanding that you were missing when you tried to start your own businesses." Marcus's face lit up at her approval. "I've also been learning about financial analysis. My supervisor has been teaching me how to evaluate project budgets, track expenses against forecasts, and identify cost overruns before they become problems." He showed her several spreadsheets that tracked project finances with a level of detail that would have been impossible for him to create just months earlier. "I'm starting to understand why my restaurants failed. I never tracked food costs accurately, never analyzed which menu items were actually profitable, never monitored labor expenses against revenue." Sarah studied the spreadsheets with professional interest. The level of financial literacy Marcus was developing would have prevented most of the business failures that had cost their father so much money over the years. "What about your personal finances?" Sarah asked. "How are you handling the debt repayment plan?" Marcus pulled out another folder, this one containing monthly budget reports and debt reduction tracking. "Jennifer and I have been living on a strict budget since we sold the house and moved into the apartment. It's been harder than I expected, but also more educational." He showed her their monthly expense tracking, which documented every dollar spent and compared it to budgeted amounts. "We've learned to cook at home instead of eating out, to find free entertainment instead of expensive activities, to buy generic brands instead of premium products." Sarah examined the budget reports, noting the discipline required to maintain such detailed tracking. "How has Jennifer handled the lifestyle change?" "Better than I expected," Marcus replied. "She said she was actually relieved to stop pretending we could afford things we couldn't. The stress of maintaining appearances while accumulating debt was worse than the inconvenience of living modestly." He flipped to a section showing their debt reduction progress. "We've paid off 3 credit cards completely and reduced our total debt by $18,000 in 3 months. Dr. Martinez says we're ahead of the original timeline." Sarah nodded approvingly. "That's substantial progress. How does it feel to see those balances going down instead of up?" Marcus's expression became thoughtful. "It feels completely different from anything I've experienced before. Instead of the temporary high I used to get from buying something expensive, this gives me a sense of building something real, something permanent." He pulled out his phone and showed her a debt tracking app. "Every payment we make, every balance that goes down, represents actual progress toward freedom, instead of just the illusion of success." Sarah studied the app, noting how it projected their debt-free date and calculated the interest savings from their accelerated payments. "You're scheduled to be debt-free in 6.5 years instead of the original 7-year timeline. That's impressive." "The best part," Marcus continued, "is that once we're debt-free, all the money we're currently using for payments can go toward building wealth instead of servicing debt. Dr. Martinez showed me projections of what our net worth could look like if we maintain this discipline for 20 years. He switched to a different app that modeled long-term wealth accumulation based on consistent saving and investing. "If we can save and invest $800 per month after we're debt-free, we could have over $400,000 by the time we're ready to retire." Sarah examined the projections with professional interest. "These calculations assume average market returns and consistent contributions. Are you confident you can maintain that level of discipline for 2 decades?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. 6 months ago, I would have said yes immediately because I didn't understand what real discipline actually required. Now that I've been practicing it for 3 months, I have a better appreciation for how challenging it is." He closed the app and looked directly at his sister. "But I also understand what the alternative looks like. I spent 15 years accumulating debt while pretending to be successful, and it led to humiliation, stress, and the complete destruction of my family's financial security." Sarah leaned back in her chair, processing everything Marcus had shared. The changes were more comprehensive than she had expected, suggesting that the shock of his public exposure might have created the motivation necessary for genuine transformation. Marcus, I have to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Marcus nodded, his expression serious. Are you doing this because you genuinely understand why these changes are necessary? Or are you doing this because you were embarrassed at Dad's birthday party and want to restore your reputation? Marcus was quiet for several minutes, apparently wrestling with the question. When he finally spoke, his voice was subdued but honest. I think it started as embarrassment and wanting to restore my reputation, he admitted. But working with Dr. Martinez and actually living within a budget and seeing debt balances decrease has taught me something I never understood before. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. I never realized how much energy I was spending on maintaining the illusion of success. The constant stress of not having enough money to cover expenses, the anxiety about credit card bills, the exhaustion of always trying to project confidence while feeling terrified inside. Sarah nodded, recognizing the description from her own observations of Marcus over the years. And now? Now I sleep better at night, Marcus replied simply. I don't have to check my credit card balances every morning and panic about how much I spent the day before. I don't have to avoid Dad's calls because I'm afraid he's going to ask about loan payments. I don't have to make excuses about why we can't afford things. He pulled out another document, this one containing what appeared to be a personal mission statement. Dr. Martinez had me write down what I actually want my life to be about, independent of what other people think or expect. Sarah read through the statement, which focused on building real competence in his work, creating genuine financial security for his family, and developing the kind of character that would make his father proud rather than disappointed. This is very different from the goals you used to talk about, Sarah observed. No mentions of impressing anyone or looking successful or building a business empire. Because I finally understand that trying to impress people was making me miserable, Marcus replied. Even when I succeeded at impressing someone, it was temporary, and I immediately had to worry about maintaining that impression. He gestured toward the document spread across the table. But this approach, building real skills and real wealth and real character, creates something that doesn't depend on other people's opinions. It creates something that belongs to me regardless of what anyone else thinks. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Michelle reminding her about her next appointment. Marcus, I hate to cut this short, but I have a meeting starting soon. Can you summarize what you wanted to accomplish by showing me all this? Marcus began gathering his documents, but his movements were unhurried. I wanted you to see that your intervention at Dad's birthday party actually worked. Not immediately, and not in the way you might have expected, but it forced me to confront realities I had been avoiding for years. He stood up and closed his portfolio. I also wanted to thank you for caring enough about our family's financial security to risk our relationship by telling the truth about my situation. Sarah stood as well, studying her brother's face for signs of the old patterns of manipulation or impression management. What she saw instead was something approaching genuine humility and determination. Marcus, I'm proud of the progress you've made, but 3 months is just the beginning. The real test will be whether you can maintain this approach when the novelty wears off and the discipline becomes routine. Marcus nodded. Dr. Martinez warned me about that. She said the hardest part comes around month 6, when the initial motivation fades, but the habits haven't become automatic yet. They walked back toward the elevator, Sarah noting how different Marcus seemed compared to 3 months earlier. The change wasn't just in his clothes or his attitude, but in something deeper, something that suggested he was finally beginning to understand what their father had tried to teach them about building something real. Sarah, Marcus said as they waited for the elevator, can I ask you something? She nodded. When you were building your investment portfolio over all those years, were there times when you were tempted to spend the money instead? Times when maintaining that discipline felt impossible? Sarah considered the question as the elevator doors opened. Many times, especially in my 20s, when friends were buying houses and new cars and taking expensive vacations, while I was living in that small apartment and driving my old Honda. They stepped into the elevator, and Sarah pressed the button for the lobby. But I learned to think of investment money as already spent, just spent on future security instead of current consumption. Once I changed my perspective that way, it became easier to resist the temptation to use it for immediate gratification. Marcus was quiet during the elevator ride, apparently processing this insight. When they reached the lobby, he turned to face his sister directly. Sarah, I know I have no right to ask for anything else after everything you've already done for our family, but I was wondering if you might be willing to meet with me periodically to discuss my progress and maybe offer advice about financial planning. Sarah studied her brother's expression, looking for signs of the old manipulation tactics. What she saw instead was genuine uncertainty and a request for mentorship rather than money. I'd be willing to meet with you quarterly, she replied, not to manage your finances or make decisions for you, but to review your progress and discuss strategies for long-term wealth building. Marcus's face lit up with genuine gratitude. That would be incredibly helpful. Dr. Martinez is excellent for budgeting and debt management, but I need to learn about investing and long-term planning. They walked toward the building's exit, Sarah noting how Marcus held doors and showed small courtesies that suggested his focus was shifting from himself to others around him. Marcus, can I give you one piece of advice that might help you maintain motivation during the difficult months ahead? Marcus stopped walking and turned his full attention to his sister. Remember that every financial decision you make is really a decision about what kind of person you want to be, Sarah continued. When you're tempted to spend money you should be saving, you're really choosing between being the kind of person who delays gratification to build something lasting and being the kind of person who prioritizes immediate pleasure over long-term security. Marcus nodded slowly, apparently considering the implications of this perspective. So it's not really about money at all, it's about character? Exactly, Sarah replied. Money is just the measurement of character-based decisions made consistently over time. People who build wealth are people who have developed the character traits that create wealth: discipline, patience, realistic planning, and the ability to delay gratification. They had reached the building's entrance, where Marcus paused before heading back to his own office. Sarah, I want you to know that what you did at Dad's birthday party was the best thing anyone has ever done for me, even though it didn't feel that way at the time. Sarah smiled, and it was completely genuine. I didn't do it to help you, Marcus. I did it to honor Dad and show gratitude for everything he taught me. The fact that it motivated you to change was an unexpected bonus. Marcus extended his hand, and Sarah shook it firmly. I'll send you a quarterly report in 3 months showing my progress on debt reduction and the start of my investment planning. I'll look forward to it, Sarah replied, and meant it. She watched through the glass doors as Marcus walked away, his posture confident but not arrogant, purposeful but not rushed. The transformation wasn't complete, and it might take years to fully solidify, but the foundation appeared to be genuine. Back in her office, Sarah found a message from her father asking if she would like to have dinner later that week. She called him back immediately, curious about what had prompted the invitation. Sarah, Robert's voice was warm when he answered. Thank you for calling back so quickly. I wanted to talk to you about something important. Of course, Dad. What's on your mind? Marcus came to see me yesterday, Robert replied. He wanted to show me his debt repayment plan and discuss the possibility of restructuring some of the loans I've made to him over the years. Sarah leaned back in her chair, intrigued. What kind of restructuring? He's proposing to consolidate all the loans into a single note with a fixed payment schedule and market rate interest, Robert continued. No more emergency bailouts, no more business investments, just a straightforward loan that he pays back like any other creditor. Sarah considered the implications of this proposal. That would certainly clarify the financial relationship between you two. What do you think of the idea? I think it shows a level of maturity and accountability that I haven't seen from him before, Robert replied, but I wanted to get your opinion before I agree to anything.
You understand financial structures better than I do. Sarah pulled out a notebook and began making notes. Dad, can you walk me through the specific terms he's proposing? Robert outlined Marcus's proposal in detail, including a 7-year payment schedule that would fully repay the outstanding loans with interest. The monthly payments were substantial but manageable based on Marcus's current income and budget. The interesting part, Robert continued, is that he's also proposing to provide quarterly financial reports showing his income, expenses, debt reduction progress, and savings accumulation. Complete transparency instead of the secrecy and evasion we've dealt with for years. Sarah was impressed despite herself. That level of financial transparency suggests he's serious about rebuilding trust and demonstrating accountability. That's what I thought, Robert agreed, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't being naive or overlooking something important. Sarah considered the proposal from multiple angles, analyzing both the financial and psychological implications. Dad, I think the structure Marcus is proposing could be beneficial for both of you, but I'd recommend a few modifications to protect your interests. She outlined several suggestions, including provisions for early payment incentives, penalties for missed payments, and annual reviews of the payment schedule based on Marcus's income changes. Most importantly, Sarah concluded, I'd recommend that the agreement include a clause stating that if Marcus defaults on the loan payments, he forfeits any future inheritance claims related to your business assets. Robert was quiet for a moment, apparently considering this suggestion. That seems harsh. It's protective, Sarah replied. Marcus has spent 15 years treating your financial support as an entitlement rather than a loan. Making the consequences clear up front will help ensure he takes the commitment seriously. You're right, Robert agreed after another pause. I've been enabling his irresponsible behavior by not enforcing real consequences for his financial failures. Sarah heard something in her father's voice that suggested he was wrestling with larger questions about family dynamics and financial responsibility. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think Marcus is capable of actually following through on this commitment, or are you concerned that he'll revert to his old patterns once the initial motivation wears off? Robert sighed heavily. Honestly, I'm not sure. The changes I've seen over the past 3 months are encouraging, but I've been disappointed so many times that I'm afraid to hope too much. Sarah understood his hesitation. What would convince you that his transformation is genuine? Consistency over time, Robert replied immediately. Not just a few months of good behavior, but years of demonstrating that he's learned to make responsible decisions without external pressure or supervision. They talked for another 20 minutes, working through the details of the proposed loan restructuring and discussing Marcus's progress toward financial responsibility. By the end of the conversation, Sarah felt cautiously optimistic about her brother's prospects for genuine change. 2 weeks later, Sarah received a text from Marcus with a photo attached. The image showed a simple apartment living room with modest furniture and a small dining table, where Marcus and Jennifer were working on what appeared to be budget planning documents. The text read, "Month 4 of living within our means. Jennifer says to tell you thanks for the wake-up call. We both needed it." Sarah smiled and forwarded the message to her father, along with a note, "Progress." 3 days after that, she received a call from Dr. Martinez, the financial counselor who had been working with Marcus. "Ms. Sarah," Dr. Martinez said, "I hope you don't mind me calling you directly. Your brother gave me your contact information and said you might be interested in an update on his progress." "I'd be very interested," Sarah replied, settling into her chair and pulling out a notebook. "Marcus has been one of my most committed clients," Dr. Martinez continued, "not just in terms of following the debt repayment plan, but in terms of genuinely understanding the psychological and behavioral changes required for long-term financial success." She went on to describe Marcus's participation in group counseling sessions where people with similar financial problems shared their experiences and supported each other's efforts to change destructive patterns. What's particularly encouraging, Dr. Martinez explained, is that Marcus has become a mentor to newer clients who are just beginning their debt recovery journey. He's able to articulate the mindset changes that enabled his progress in ways that really resonate with people who are struggling with similar issues. Sarah was intrigued by this development. What kind of mentoring is he providing? Primarily helping people understand the difference between surface-level budgeting and deeper psychological change, Dr. Martinez replied. Many clients can follow a budget for a few weeks, but they struggle with the emotional aspects of giving up the lifestyle and identity that got them into debt in the first place. She described how Marcus had shared his own experience of realizing that his spending was driven by a need to project success rather than build security, and how that insight had enabled him to embrace a more modest lifestyle without feeling deprived. He's particularly effective at helping clients understand that delayed gratification isn't about punishment or deprivation, but about choosing long-term satisfaction over short-term pleasure.
Sarah made notes throughout the conversation, impressed by this unexpected dimension of Marcus's transformation. The fact that he was helping others suggested that his changes went beyond mere compliance with external expectations. After ending the call with Dr. Martinez, Sarah sat in her office thinking about the trajectory of her family's story. 3 months earlier, she had given her father a $2 million check as a demonstration of principles learned and consistently applied over decades. The gift had been intended to honor her father and prove that his lessons about building wealth had taken root in at least one of his children. She had not expected that the confrontation would catalyze genuine change in Marcus, whom she had written off years earlier as someone too committed to his illusions to ever embrace reality. The possibility that her intervention might have saved her brother from a lifetime of financial failure and family disappointment was more meaningful than she had anticipated. Her phone buzzed with an email from her father containing the signed loan agreement with Marcus along with a note. First payment received on time and in full. Thank you for helping me structure this properly. Sarah opened the attachment and reviewed the agreement, noting that Marcus had accepted all of her recommended modifications, including the inheritance forfeiture clause. The willingness to accept such stringent terms suggested a level of commitment that went beyond mere convenience. That evening, she met her father for dinner at a quiet restaurant near his office. Robert looked more relaxed than she had seen him in years, as if a burden he had been carrying for a long time had finally been lifted. "I have something to show you," he said, pulling out a folder similar to the one Marcus had brought to her office weeks earlier. Inside were detailed financial projections showing the impact of Marcus's debt repayment plan on the family's overall financial picture. With Marcus's debts being repaid systematically and no new emergency bailouts required, Robert's retirement security was significantly improved. "I've been able to redirect the money I was spending on Marcus's crises toward more productive investments," Robert explained. "My financial advisor estimates that my net worth will be 15% higher by the time I retire, simply because I'm no longer hemorrhaging money on failed business ventures." Sarah studied the projections with professional interest. "That's a substantial improvement, Dad. You're looking at an additional $400,000 in retirement assets." Robert nodded. Money that can be invested in actually productive activities instead of being wasted on Marcus's fantasies about business success. They ordered dinner and continued discussing the family's improved financial dynamics. Sarah was struck by how much more optimistic her father seemed now that he no longer had to worry about being repeatedly asked to fund his son's next venture. "Sarah," Robert said as they waited for their meals, "I want to talk to you about something else, something I've been thinking about since your birthday gift." Sarah looked up from her menu, curious about the serious tone in her father's voice. "Your $2 million gift demonstrated something I always hoped for but was never sure I would see," Robert continued. "It showed that you truly understood the principles I tried to teach you about building wealth and creating security." He paused, apparently choosing his words carefully. "But it also made me realize that I've never properly acknowledged the sacrifice and discipline that gift represented." Sarah was about to respond, but Robert held up his hand. "Let me finish. You lived modestly for 24 years, delaying gratification and investing consistently in order to build the wealth that made that gift possible. That level of discipline and long-term thinking deserves recognition." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table between them. "This is the deed to the property where my first construction office was located, the building where I learned most of what I know about running a business." Sarah stared at the envelope, surprised by the gesture. "Dad, I don't understand. Are you giving me a building?" "I'm giving you a legacy," Robert replied. "That property is now worth approximately $1.8 million. But more importantly, it represents the foundation of everything our family has built." Sarah opened the envelope and examined the deed, noting that it had been transferred into her name. "Dad, this is too much. You don't need to give me anything to acknowledge what I did." "Yes, I do," Robert said firmly, "because your gift wasn't just about money. It was about values, about demonstrating that you had learned to think long-term and build something lasting instead of just consuming what others had created." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "That property can be the foundation for your own business ventures if you choose to pursue them. Unlike Marcus's failed attempts, you have the financial discipline and business understanding to actually succeed." Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications of her father's gift. The property was valuable enough to provide substantial rental income, or could be redeveloped into something even more profitable. Dad, are you suggesting I should start my own business? I'm suggesting you have options, Robert replied. Options that come from making smart financial decisions consistently over time. Options that Marcus never had because he was too focused on spending money instead of building wealth. He leaned forward, his expression intense. That property can be the foundation for your own business ventures if you choose to pursue them. Unlike Marcus's failed attempts, you have the financial discipline and business understanding to actually succeed. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications of her father's gift. The property was valuable enough to provide substantial rental income, or could be redeveloped into something even more profitable. Dad, are you suggesting I should start my own business? I'm suggesting you have options, Robert replied. Options that come from making smart financial decisions consistently over time. Options that Marcus never had because he was too focused on spending money instead of building wealth. He leaned forward, his expression intense. That property can be the foundation for your own business ventures if you choose to pursue them. Unlike Marcus's failed attempts, you have the financial discipline and business understanding to actually succeed. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications of her father's gift. The property was valuable enough to provide substantial rental income, or could be redeveloped into something even more profitable. Dad, are you suggesting I should start my own business? I'm suggesting you have options, Robert replied. Options that come from making smart financial decisions consistently over time. Options that Marcus never had because he was too focused on spending money instead of building wealth. He leaned forward, his expression intense. That property can be the foundation for your own business ventures if you choose to pursue them. Unlike Marcus's failed attempts, you have the financial discipline and business understanding to actually succeed. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications of her father's gift. The property was valuable enough to provide substantial rental income, or could be redeveloped into something even more profitable. Dad, are you suggesting I should start my own business? I'm suggesting you have options, Robert replied. Options that come from making smart financial decisions consistently over time. Options that Marcus never had because he was too focused on spending money instead of building wealth. He leaned forward, his expression intense. That property can be the foundation for your own business ventures if you choose to pursue them. Unlike Marcus's failed attempts, you have the financial discipline and business understanding to actually succeed. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications of her father's gift. The property was valuable enough to provide substantial rental income, or could be redeveloped into something even more profitable. Dad, are you suggesting I should start my own business? I'm suggesting you have options, Robert replied. Options that come from making smart financial decisions consistently over time. Options that Marcus never had because he was too focused on spending money instead of building wealth. He leaned forward, his expression intense. That property can be the foundation for your own business ventures if you choose to pursue them. Unlike Marcus's failed attempts, you have the financial discipline and business understanding to actually succeed. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications of her father's gift. The property was valuable enough to provide substantial rental income, or could be redeveloped into something even more profitable. Dad, are you suggesting I should start my own business? I'm suggesting you have options, Robert replied. Options that come from making smart financial decisions consistently over time. Options that Marcus never had because he was too focused on spending money instead of building wealth. He leaned forward, his expression intense. That property can be the foundation for your own business ventures if you choose to pursue them. Unlike Marcus's failed attempts, you have the financial discipline and business understanding to actually succeed. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications of her father's gift. The property was valuable enough to provide substantial rental income, or could be redeveloped into something even more profitable. Dad, are you suggesting I should start my own business? I'm suggesting you have options, Robert replied. Options that come from making smart financial decisions consistently over time. Options that Marcus never had because he was too focused on spending money instead of building wealth. He leaned forward, his expression intense. That property can be the foundation for your own business ventures if you choose to pursue them. Unlike Marcus's failed attempts, you have the financial discipline and business understanding to actually succeed. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications of her father's gift. The property was valuable enough to provide substantial rental income, or could be redeveloped into something even more profitable. Dad, are you suggesting I should start my own business? I'm suggesting you have options, Robert replied. Options that come from making smart financial decisions consistently over time. Options that Marcus never had because he was too focused on spending money instead of building wealth. He leaned forward, his expression intense. That property can be the foundation for your own business ventures if you choose to pursue them. Unlike Marcus's failed attempts, you have previously taught me for understanding my debt situation. I identified the root causes of the problems instead of just treating symptoms, and I created a timeline based on realistic resource constraints rather than wishful thinking. Sarah smiled, recognizing the principles their father had tried to teach them both applied to a new context. How did your supervisor respond to your analysis? He was impressed by the thoroughness and realism of the plan, Marcus replied. He said most people in my position would have either made excuses for the project's problems or promised unrealistic improvements to try to look good. Marcus went on to describe how his approach had led to his first genuine professional recognition based on competence rather than family connections or borrowed money. The satisfaction in his voice was completely different from the shallow excitement he had shown when talking about his previous business ventures. Marcus, Sarah said, it sounds like you're finally learning what Dad tried to teach us about the difference between looking successful and building success. I think you're right, Marcus replied. And Sarah, I wanted to thank you again for forcing me to confront reality instead of letting me continue living in denial. After ending the call, Sarah stood outside her new property thinking about the trajectory of her family's story. Her father's lessons about building wealth through discipline and long-term thinking had taken root in different ways for both of his children, but they had both ultimately learned that real success comes from creating value rather than consuming it. 6 months later, Sarah hosted a small dinner party at her apartment to celebrate Marcus's first full year of consistent debt payments and financial responsibility. The guest list included Marcus and Jennifer, their father, Dr. Martinez, and Joseph from the bank, who had supported Sarah throughout her wealth-building journey. Marcus stood up during dessert to make a brief speech, his demeanor confident but humble in a way that would have been impossible a year earlier. I want to thank everyone here for helping me learn the difference between financial success and financial stability, he began. A year ago, I thought success meant having enough money to buy impressive things. Now I understand that stability means having enough discipline to build lasting security. He looked directly at Sarah. My sister taught me that real wealth isn't about what you can afford to buy, it's about what you can afford to give. Her $2 million gift to Dad wasn't just generous, it was proof that she had learned to think beyond her own immediate desires. Sarah felt tears in her eyes as Marcus continued. I spent 15 years taking money from our father while learning nothing and building nothing. Sarah spent 24 years building wealth that enabled her to give back more than she had ever received. Robert raised his glass. To both of my children, who have taught me that the greatest gift a parent can give is not money, but the principles that create money. Everyone raised their glasses in a toast that felt like the conclusion of a long journey and the beginning of a new chapter. Later that evening, after the guests had left, Sarah sat in her living room looking at the framed photograph her mother had returned to her months earlier, the one showing her with the blue ribbon from her high school art show. Tomorrow, she would meet with an architect about renovating her new property into a combination art studio and financial education center, a business that would combine her creative interests with her expertise in wealth building. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus.